All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at a guy who, well, he kind of had a problem with knowing stuff. Francisco Sanchez, a doctor and philosopher from back in the 1500s, he was a real skeptic. I mean, his most famous book is actually called That Nothing is Known. And it wasn't just a catchy title. This guy was seriously challenging what anyone could really know about, well, anything.
Yeah, he really went there. And to get into his headspace, we'll be using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's like a deep dive cheat sheet on Sanches. We'll cover his life, what he argued for, and why he's still relevant, especially for anyone who, well, likes to think about thinking, how we know what we think we know, that kind of thing.
Right, like how much can we actually be sure of? So today's mission, if you choose to accept it, is to wrap our heads around how this Renaissance dude basically took a sledgehammer to the whole idea of absolute truth. Why did he believe nothing is known? More importantly, why should we care in the 21st century? His way of looking at things gives us a totally different angle on, well, trying to figure stuff out. So who was this Francisco Sanchez?
Well, he was a doctor, a professor, and a big-time skeptic. His book from 1581, That Nothing is Known, basically threw down the gauntlet. Like, can we ever really be 100% sure about anything in the world around us? That was his big question.
Heavy stuff. But get this, even his name is kind of mysterious. Was it Sanchez with an Elisage, the Portuguese way, or Sanchez with a Z's more Spanish? Even the experts can't totally agree.
It's like even his identity is up for debate. Talk about uncertainty baked into his story. Kind of makes you wonder, right? If we can't even be sure about a guy's name, how much can we really know for sure about anything?
Seriously. So Sanchez was born around 1551. His family was converso, which basically meant they had Jewish or Islamic roots, but had converted to Christianity, sometimes, under pressure. They moved to Bordeaux when he was about 11, and he ended up going to this fancy school, the Collège de Gien. That's where he first encountered the big intellectual game in town, Aristotelian logic, and what they called scholasticism, and how they taught it there. It was a big deal.
So instead of going straight to the source, reading Aristotle himself, they focused on commentaries about Aristotle. Like, imagine learning about art history just by reading art critics. You'd never really see the paintings for yourself. Plus, philosophy was tangled up with theology. It wasn't just about figuring things out. It was about fitting into religious doctrines.
Hmm.
And this whole setup, secondhand interpretations and religious authority that probably had a big impact on Sanchez later on. He was learning what to think, but not really how to think for himself.
Yeah, like critical thinking wasn't exactly encouraged. But then he goes and studies medicine, first at La Sapienza in Rome and then at Montpellier. And his medical training seems like super important to understanding his whole skeptical thing.
It's like this huge contrast. On one hand, he's got this super abstract philosophical training, and then on the other, he's dealing with the very real, messy business of the human body. And that medical approach, especially Galen's emphasis on observation and experience, that's a far cry from just sitting around debating Aristotle. Seeing how the body works, what heals, what doesn't fail, that must made him appreciate seeing things for himself, not just relying on theories. So he's starting to question the traditional ways of knowing.
He's becoming a hands-on thinker, less about word games and more about real-world stuff, and that shows up even before his big book. He wrote this Poem of the Comet of 1577, and it's not just some romantic ode to a space rock. It's actually a pretty sharp critique of, well, how people tried to explain the world back then.
He basically takes aim at astrological predictions and this whole Aristotelian cosmology, this fixed hierarchical view of the universe. He's saying, wait a minute, you're telling me this little comet is dictating human events and messing with free will? Like, come on, people.
Yeah, like our fates hinge on a cosmic snowball. Sanchez just wasn't buying it.
Right. He's pushing back against this idea of comets as omens or signs of like some predetermined plan. He's stressing that humans are unpredictable, we have free will, and astrology, well, it can't really explain that. But he's doing more than just debunking astrology.
He's going after any argument that doesn't have solid evidence, right?
Exactly. And this is where his scientific thinking really shines through. He's demanding proof, a clear connection between this celestial event, the comet, and its supposed effects. Can you show me the link? If not, your theory is just a bunch of hot air.
Show me the data. It's almost like he's a scientist first, philosopher second. And this critical thinking continues in his letter to Christopher Clavius, which was this whole debate about what mathematical truth actually is. Clavius, a really respected mathematician, believed that math is like innately true, we know it without needing any experience. Sanches, though, well, he had a different take.
Yeah, a much more grounded perspective. He even questioned Euclidean geometry. that bedrock of math.
Mm.
He argued for a more practical understanding of it, like measurement of land.
Hmm.
He's saying it's not about these abstract, perfect shapes. It's about how we use geometry in the real world.
So, like, measuring your backyard isn't about some perfect triangle in the sky. It's about understanding the actual space you have. And that's based on experience, not some innate knowledge. And he goes after Clavius for relying on this ancient philosopher, Proclus, who believed that mathematical objects are like innate ideas we're born knowing them.
And this gets to the heart of Sanches' argument. He sees it as blind faith in authority, accepting an idea just because some big-name philosopher said so.
Mm.
He's demanding that concepts be grounded in real sensory experience, something we can observe and measure. Otherwise, they're just word games.
Mhm.
Definitions built on other definitions without any real connection to the world.
It's like trying to explain the color blue to someone who's been blind since birth. Words only go so far. Which brings us to the main event, the book that put Sanches on the map, That Nothing Is Known. I mean, that title alone is a statement. But did he really mean we can't know anything? Like zero, zip, nada?
It's a provocative title, for sure.
Sure.
But it's more about highlighting the limits of knowing, the difficulty of achieving absolute certainty, not about saying we're completely clueless. It's a really high bar for knowledge. Like, can we really be sure about anything?
So it's more nuanced than just giving up on knowing anything. And it's interesting, the book starts in a way that feels similar to Descartes' Discourse on the Method, which came out decades later. Sanches describes this deep desire for knowledge that eventually leads to disillusionment with all the philosophical systems out there.
They both went on this really personal, introspective journey, questioning everything they'd been taught. And this shift towards understanding how we know, not just what we know that's a big deal in the history of philosophy. They were like the original intellectual detectives, starting with a blank slate.
Sanches then goes on to critique language and definitions themselves. He's saying names are just arbitrary labels. They don't capture the essence of a thing. And he dissects these big philosophical terms like being, substance, essence, pointing out that they're often defined in a circular way, like using words to define other words without ever getting to the actual thing itself.
He was so ahead of his time, really anticipating later philosophers who wrestled with the limitations of language. Trying to pin down reality with words, he's showing how tricky that really is.
And then he goes after the Aristotelian syllogism, which was like the golden rule of logic back then. All men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is moral. Sanches says, hang on, the conclusion is already baked into the premises. It's not telling us anything truly new about the world.
He's highlighting the limits of deductive reasoning. If your starting assumptions aren't rock solid, then your conclusions, even if they're logically sound, aren't guaranteed to be true.
It's like building a house on sand. Looks good at first, but not going to last. And a big part of Sanches' thinking was this focus on particulars, on real individual things we experience. He was a nominalist. That means he believed that only individual things actually exist, not these abstract universals like redness or humanity.
So it's not treeness, it's this specific tree in front of me. And that has big implications for how we categorize the world. If only individual things are real, then those broader categories, well, they're more like mental shortcuts we use to make sense of things, not some fundamental reality.
So we're imposing order on the chaos, not discovering some pre-existing order. But here's the thing, even though Sanches was all about sensory experience, he also realized our senses have limits. They only show us surface appearances, the color, shape, texture of a thing, not its true essence, its whatness. And our minds, relying on those senses, well, they're limited too.
He was a nuanced thinker, not blindly trusting our senses. He's saying we're only grasping at the surface, never fully getting to the bottom of what something really is.
Like the tip of the iceberg, right? There's a whole lot more going on underneath. He even questioned causality, the idea that one thing causes another. He's like, just because someone is your father doesn't mean you know everything about them. And he even extended this to the idea of God as the first cause. If we can't even comprehend God, how can we truly understand the world that supposedly came from God?
It's a huge question about the limits of reason. If the starting point is beyond our grasp, then trying to understand everything else based on that starting point, well, it's kind of setting ourselves up for failure. And that's where his idea of fideism comes in.
Right, so he wasn't against religious faith. He's saying reason has its limits, especially when it comes to the big ultimate questions. And he really pushed back against any knowledge built on shaky foundations, assumptions that can't be definitively proven.
He's constantly pushing us to examine those starting points. If our basic assumptions are wobbly, then anything built on them, no matter how logical it seems, is going to be wobbly too.
It's back to that house on sand. You need a solid foundation first. And there's this really interesting personal side to his skepticism. He's almost like wrestling with his own doubts, feeling frustrated that we can't know things with absolute certainty. But at the same time, he recognizes the certainty of his own thoughts and feelings in that very moment.
It's a powerful tension, doubting everything out there, but acknowledging his own inner experience.
So he's living the questions, not just theorizing about them. And despite all this skepticism, his book ends with this call to work and the question, quid, which means what? He's not saying just give up on knowing. It's more like keep searching, keep questioning, don't become complacent.
That's what it means to be a philosopher, right? To
Yeah.
keep asking questions, even if you never get all the answers.
So where does Sanches fit into the whole world of skepticism? Was he more like the academic skeptics, guys like Carneades, or the Pyrrhonian skeptics who are even more hardcore doubters?
It's a good question. While Sanchez saw himself in the academic tradition, his nothing is known wasn't quite the same as the Pyrrhonian view, which was all about suspending judgment on, well, everything. Sanchez was more focused on how hard it is to know things for sure, not necessarily saying we should doubt everything equally, more like be aware of the limits of what you think you know.
And that's where his medical background comes in again, right? That Galen influence, with the emphasis on experience and observation.
Absolutely. Just like a doctor looks at symptoms, tests, treatments, Sanchez is advocating for that same evidence-based approach in philosophy. He's saying, look, don't just rely on theories and hearsay. Go out and observe the world, test your ideas, and then maybe, just maybe, you can get a little closer to the truth.
It's about being grounded, not getting lost in abstractions. And you can't talk about Sanchez without mentioning Descartes, even though they ended up in different places philosophically. They both started with this radical questioning, this really introspective approach. Sanchez definitely feels like a precursor to Descartes in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but while they both questioned the traditional ways of knowing, they took different paths. Sanchez was all about the limits of our senses, while Descartes was trying to find certainty in reason and logic. Their views on math were also different. And importantly, Sanchez never doubted that the external world actually exists, which was a big part of Descartes' initial skepticism.
Right. Descartes famously doubted everything, even his own existence, at least for a while. But Sanchez, being a doctor, was much more grounded in the physical world. He focused on the limits of knowing even our own bodies with complete certainty. Descartes, on the other hand, was all about the thinking self, the I think, therefore I am idea, the mind as the foundation of knowledge.
It's like they're coming at the problem of knowledge from opposite ends. But both are really pushing us to think critically about how we know what we think we know.
So they're both important, but in different ways. So wrapping up, why is Francisco Sanchez still relevant today? Why should we care about this guy from 500 years ago?
Well, he's a key figure in the history of skepticism. He bridges the gap between ancient skeptics and more modern thinkers. And even if his direct influence on someone like Descartes is debatable, his work is super important for understanding how skepticism developed over time.
It's like he laid some groundwork for later thinkers to build on.
Exactly. And for a while, he was kind of overlooked, seen as just a footnote. But even big names like Leibniz recognized how important his skepticism was, especially for keeping fields like science from becoming too rigid and dogmatic. A little bit of doubt can actually help us move forward.
It stops us from getting stuck in our ways, keeps us open to new ideas.
And what's really cool is that some scholars even see connections between Sanchez's critique of language and the work of Wittgenstein, a 20th century philosopher. So his ideas are still sparking conversations today.
It's like his questions never go out of style.
Right. And his legacy is really captured in that final quid. It's a call to keep asking questions, to never stop being curious, to accept that we might not have all the answers, but to keep searching anyway. That's what it means to be a lifelong learner, to be, in a way, a philosopher.
So what are the big takeaways for our listeners today? What should they remember from our deep dive into Sanches?
I think the main point is to see how this guy, this doctor philosopher from centuries ago, really challenged what we think we can know. He questioned everything: language, definitions, our senses, our ability to reason. His work is a reminder to be humble in the face of knowledge, to be critical, to always ask, how do I know this? What's the evidence?
It's about being a critical thinker, not just taking things at face value.
Exactly. And for our listeners, the aha moment might be realizing that these questions Sanchez was asking back then, they're just as relevant today. Maybe even more so, with all the information overload we face. His work reminds us that philosophy isn't just some abstract thing. It's a toolkit for navigating the world, for figuring out what to believe and how to make sense of it all.
It's about being a conscious, aware thinker, not just passively absorbing information, but engaging with it, questioning it.
And this deep dive should spark even more questions for our listeners as they go about their lives. What does it mean to be a skeptic, but not a cynic? How can we apply Sanches' emphasis on experience and observation to our own lives? And how can we use his critique of language to be more aware of how words are used to persuade, manipulate, and even deceive?
It's about being savvy consumers of information, not just letting it wash over us.
And here's a final thought to ponder. If perfect knowledge is impossible, as Sanchez suggested, does that make the pursuit of knowledge pointless? Or does it mean that the journey itself, the constant learning and exploring, is the real reward? How can we embrace Sanchez' quid, that constant questioning in our own lives?
Food for thought. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.